Your ancestors crossed the Pacific Ocean with no map, no compass, and nothing in their pockets. You cannot find your car. In 1976, a navigator named Mau Piailug proved it, sailing 2,600 miles from Hawaii to Tahiti with his eyes shut, reading the direction of an island he could not see through the waves hitting his spine. You turn your phone in a slow circle like a confused pigeon, waiting for a blue dot to tell you which way your own body is pointing. That gap is not luck, and it is not magic. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what they had, and why it is still buried in your skull, switched off, waiting. If figuring out how humans actually work sounds like a good way to spend the next 15 minutes, subscribe, because this channel takes the weird stuff your body still does and explains why. Now, back to that canoe, because the way Mau found land is stranger than it sounds. Here is the thing nobody tells you about ancient navigation. The stars are the easy part. Everyone assumes the trick was memorizing constellations, and yes, that mattered. But it is the beginner level, and if that was all there was to it, this would be a very short story. The hard part, the part that borders on unbelievable, is what you do when the sky disappears. Clouds roll in for 3 days, fog, rain. The one thing you were steering by is gone. Picture it. 3 days without a single star, no horizon you can trust, just identical gray water in every direction, and a small wooden boat somewhere in the middle of it with your whole life aboard. So what did they do when the map above them vanished? Hold that question, because the answer is the whole point. Start with the stars anyway, because you need them to understand the rest. In 1976, a group in Hawaii built a double-hulled voyaging canoe called Hakulia and set out to prove something everyone in the modern world had quietly decided was impossible. The claim was that ancient Polynesians had settled thousands of islands scattered across an ocean that covers a third of the planet, on purpose, by skill, not by drifting around and getting lucky. Scholars at the time actually leaned toward lucky, so Hakulia would sail from Hawaii to Tahiti, roughly 2,600 miles of open water, with no compass, no charts, no radio for navigation, no instruments of any kind. The problem was that no living Hawaiians still knew how to do it. The knowledge had died out at home, so they went and found the last man who still carried it, Mau Piailug, from a tiny island called Satawal in Micronesia, one of a handful of master navigators left on Earth who had been trained the old way, as a child, memorizing the sea instead of the alphabet. Before he could walk a straight line on land, he was learning the names of stars, drilled by his elders until the whole night sky lived inside him. And the centerpiece of what Mau carried in his head was something called a star compass. Not a device. A mental model. Picture the whole circle of the horizon around you divided into 32 points, and at each point, a specific star that rises there, and later sets at the mirror point on the other side. A navigator memorizes hundreds of stars and the exact house on the horizon where each one climbs out of the sea. As one star rises too high to use, the next one in that same house takes over. You are not reading one North Star. You are reading a slow, turning wheel of them, all night. Every night. Imagine standing on that deck in the dark, the whole bowl of the sky wheeling slowly overhead, and knowing which exact door in that circle each star is about to step through, and which one will replace it. That is what Nainoa Thompson had to rebuild almost from scratch, the first Hawaiian in generations to navigate open ocean by tradition, who later ran the whole Polynesian voyaging society. He learned it standing next to Mau, watching a man point at empty sky and name what was about to appear. Now, the clouds. Because the ocean does not care about your beautiful star compass, and sooner or later it takes the stars away. And this is where the story stops being impressive and starts being genuinely strange. When the sky went dark, Mau did not stop. He lay down. He put his body against the floor of the canoe, and he read the water. Flat on his back in the bottom of the hull, the wet wood cold against his spine, the crew silent above him, he went looking for something none of them could feel. Here is what that actually means, because it is not mystical, even though the researchers who watched it called it something closer to a different sense than a science. The open ocean is not chaos. It is layered. Deep, powerful swells roll across thousands of miles, generated by distant, permanent weather systems, and they hold their direction stubbornly, for days, no matter what the local wind is doing. A trained navigator can lie in the hull and feel several of these swells at once, crossing under the boat at different angles and different speeds, and tell them apart by their rhythm, the way you can pick out the bass line under a song. One long, slow lift from far to the south. A shorter, quicker one crossing it from the east. A third underneath both. Each swell is a road that points a consistent direction. Lose the stars, and you still have 4 or 5 roads you can feel through your own back. Western sailors who tried to learn this described it as feeling less like knowledge and more like an entirely separate sense modern people had simply stopped using. That is the real technique behind every dramatic line you have heard about navigators tasting the ocean. Nobody was tasting anything. He was feeling the pulse of the whole Pacific through a plank of wood, lying down, eyes shut, while everyone else saw an empty gray blank. Sit with that for a second. He did it for 34 days, not 34 minutes, not one heroic night. More than a month of open water, with every life aboard resting on what one man could feel through the small of his back. He was the only person aboard who could, and the island appeared where he said it would. But a swell only points a direction. It does not tell you when to turn, or how far you have come. And this is where you meet the single most elegant idea in the entire history of finding your way. It is called Etak, documented by the anthropologist David Lewis, who spent years at sea with Pacific wayfinders and wrote the definitive book on all of this, called We, the Navigators. Etak solves a problem that sounds unsolvable without instruments. How do you track your progress across open water when there are no mile markers and nothing to see? The answer is a mental trick, so clean it feels like cheating. You imagine your canoe is standing perfectly still. The canoe never moves. Instead, you picture a reference island, off to the side, one you cannot even see, and in your mind that island slides backward, past you, from one star point to the next as the voyage unfolds. Close your eyes on that deck and hold the picture. Your canoe nailed to one fixed spot, motionless, and an island you have never once seen, drifting quietly backward past your shoulder, star by star, marking off a journey you are not allowed to watch. When the invisible island has moved from this star house to that one, you know exactly how far along you are. The navigator is not tracking himself moving through the ocean. He is holding the entire ocean still and watching the world flow past his stationary boat. That is a piece of software running on human wetware with no screen and no battery, and it worked well enough to colonize a quarter of the globe, which raises the obvious question you are probably asking. If there were no maps, how did anyone teach any of this? You do not learn to feel 5 swells at once from a lecture. And the answer, in the Marshall Islands, is one of the strangest and most beautiful objects humans have ever made. They are called stick charts. Imagine a lattice of thin curved sticks lashed together with fiber, with little cowrie shells tied on at certain points. To your eye, it looks like abstract art or a very confusing coat hanger. It is neither. It is a map of the ocean itself, except it does not chart the land. It charts the water. The curved sticks show how the great swells bend and wrap and collide as they run into the islands, and the shells mark where the islands sit inside those patterns. There are 3 kinds, and here is the detail that should stop you cold. The mattang was a training chart, abstract, for learning the physics of how waves behave around a single island. The meddo showed a real cluster of islands and their actual swell patterns, and the rebbelib mapped a whole chain of the archipelago. But here is the part. They did not take them to sea. The chart was studied on land, memorized completely, and then left behind. Picture a young navigator crouched over one of these lattices for months, tracing every curve until the pattern is burned in, then wading out and pushing off with nothing in his hands at all. The navigator carried the entire thing in his head and sailed out with empty hands, feeling for the exact wave patterns the sticks had taught him to expect. The map was a study guide you were required to throw away. Quick one before this goes any further. Drop a comment and be honest with yourself. Could you memorize an entire map, then throw it into the sea, and still trust it with your life? Because that is exactly what they did, every time they left the shore. Now, before you decide this was purely a Pacific miracle, understand that the same genius was running everywhere humans lived, in the shape of whatever their world demanded. Leave the ocean. Walk into the Australian outback, into a landscape so vast and so dry that a wrong valley means no water and a wrong direction means death. There are no stone landmarks for hundreds of miles that would mean anything to you. And yet Aboriginal Australians crossed it, precisely, along invisible routes, using something you already own the ability to use. Songs. They are called songlines. A songline is a sung sequence of verses, and each verse names a feature of the land in the exact order you meet it as you travel. This rock, then that waterhole, then the ridge shaped like a sleeping animal, then the place where the ground turns red. The song is the map. Sing it in order, and it tells you what is coming next and where to find water and shelter and safe passage for hundreds of miles across country you have never physically seen. The rhythm carries the distance. The fixed order of the words carries the turns, so a person can walk into an empty red horizon and arrive exactly where the song said the water would be. Researchers today can still walk these routes from the memorized song alone, and the tradition is estimated to reach back tens of thousands of years, one of the oldest continuous forms of knowledge on the planet. Think about why that works, because this is the quiet joke of the whole video. You cannot remember where you left your keys, but you can still sing every word of a song you have not heard since you were 12. Human memory is spectacular at melody and sequence and hopeless at raw facts, so an entire continent's worth of geography got encoded in the one format the brain refuses to delete. Your ancestors did not fight how the brain works. They hid the map inside a song. Time for a quick myth to die, because you have almost certainly been told this one. Moss grows on the north side of trees, so if you are ever lost, find the moss and you have found your direction. This is nonsense, and no real navigator ever relied on it. Moss grows wherever it is damp and shady, which depends on the tree, the slope, the canopy, and which half of the planet you are standing on. In a thick forest, it grows all the way around the trunk. The people who actually survived did not stake their lives on a fuzzy green rumor. They read swells, stars, birds, and songs. Systems that worked every time, not a plant that works if you squint. So if that was your emergency backup plan, upgrade it. Because here is a plan that genuinely worked, and it is delightful. Birds. Near the end of a Pacific voyage, before any land is visible, certain seabirds become living signposts. Frigate birds and terns roost on land at night and fly out to fish at dawn, then return at dusk. So if you spot a tern in the late afternoon carrying a fish, you do not just know land is near. You know which way it is, because that bird is flying home, and home is exactly where you want to go. Watch its line against the fading sky and turn to follow it. The navigators effectively expanded the size of their target. An island is a tiny dot, easy to miss by 50 miles. But the cloud of birds around it, plus the way islands snag moisture and grow their own distinctive caps of cloud, plus the way swells bounce off the shore and interfere on the far side, turns a pinpoint into something dozens of miles wide. You are not aiming at a needle. You are aiming at everything the needle disturbs. And the Pacific was not the only ocean with a trick. Across the North Atlantic, there is a long-standing story about the Vikings and something called a sunstone. The idea is that a certain crystal, held to the sky, reveals the sun's position even through thick cloud because it responds to the way light gets polarized across the dome of the sky. Now, be careful here, because this one is genuinely debated. The physics is real. Experiments prove that a calcite crystal really can pin down the hidden sun through overcast, and a crystal like this was even found in the wreck of an Elizabethan warship next to the navigation tools. But, and this matters, no such stone has ever actually been dug up at a confirmed Viking site, so treat it as plausible and physically sound. A very good maybe, not a proven fact. The honest version of history is more interesting than the certain one anyway. So now step back and look at the pattern, because it is the same pattern every single time. On land, animal migration paths became highways, worn by generations of hooves toward reliable water and easy passage, and humans simply followed the animals who had already solved the terrain. Cairns of piled stone and notched bark marked the safe routes, the human equivalent of leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that do not get eaten. And running underneath all of it, the real engine, was dead reckoning. The mind quietly keeping a running tally of every direction changed and every distance covered, so that at any moment you have a rough sense of the invisible line back to where you started. You do this too, badly, in a building you know well. You can point toward your own front door from any room without thinking, even with your eyes closed, because part of your mind never stopped counting the turns. They did the same thing, brilliantly, across an ocean, which finally brings you back to your own broken sense of direction and to that laboratory in 2019. Because the natural question by now is unavoidable. If ancient humans were this good, and you are this bad, did people lose an actual sense along the way? And there is a real, careful, honest answer, and you have to resist the fun version of it. Start with the fun version so you can put it down. In 2019, a team at Caltech ran a striking experiment. They sat people inside a shielded chamber, rotated a magnetic field around them at the same strength as the Earth's own field, and recorded their brainwaves. And the brain responded. Specifically, a certain band of brain activity dropped in a measurable, repeatable way when the field turned in particular directions, the first solid neuroscience evidence that the human brain detects magnetic fields at all. It is tempting, so tempting, to call that a lost sixth sense, the ancient inner compass that let your ancestors sail by the pull of the planet. Do not. The honest reading is much narrower. It shows the brain registers magnetism somewhere below awareness. It does not show that anyone can feel it, use it, or steer by it. Nobody has demonstrated a person navigating by this. It is a subconscious flicker on a monitor, not a superpower, and pretending otherwise would insult the actual navigators, whose skill was not a hidden organ, but 10,000 hours of trained attention, which is exactly what the far better study proves. In the year 2000, a researcher named Eleanor Maguire scanned the brains of London taxi drivers, the ones who spend years memorizing every street and alley of an insane, tangled city to pass a test literally called the knowledge. Think about what that training is. Grown adults, riding the city for years, forcing thousands of crooked streets into memory by sheer repetition. And she found something physical. A region of the brain tied to spatial memory, the posterior hippocampus, was measurably larger in the cabbies than in ordinary people, and the longer a driver had been at it, the bigger it was. Let that land. The part of your brain that holds maps physically grows when you force it to hold maps. It is a muscle, which means the reason your ancestors could feel an island through their spine and you cannot find your gate is not that they were born with a magic organ you lost. It is that they exercised the muscle every day of their lives, out of necessity, and you handed the entire job to a glowing rectangle that does it for you before you even have to try. You did not lose a sixth sense. You stopped lifting the weight. Researchers are careful not to claim your phone is damaging your brain. There is no proof of that, but the logic is hard to dodge. A skill you never practice does not develop. That is not a tragedy. It is a choice, and choices can be remade. So here is what you are going to do, and it starts the next time you walk out of a store into a parking lot. Before you reflexively reach for the little blue dot, stop and try to point north. Just guess. Then, on your walk somewhere familiar, leave the phone in your pocket and actually notice the turns, the landmarks, the shape of the route, the way the light falls. Sing your commute if you have to. You are not going to cross the Pacific by feel. But you are running the exact same software that took your ancestors across a third of the planet with empty hands and a head full of stars. And every single time you choose to use it instead of outsourcing it, that little region deep in your skull gets a fraction stronger. The man in the canoe was not a different species. He was you, with the muscle switched on. And now the question this whole thing was really about, the one the opening left hanging. What is the one thing they could do that your phone will never teach you back? It is not the star compass, and it is not the swells, and it is not the songs. It is attention. The relentless, physical, lifelong habit of actually paying attention to the world around you instead of a screen describing it to you. That is the sense you traded away. The good news is, it was never lost. It was just set down. So tell me in the comments, when was the last time you actually found your way somewhere with nothing but your own head? And would you trust yourself to do it again? Because the muscle is still there. It is waiting. And it starts the moment you look up.